we have RF's principal engineer, Tim Fryfogle, to discuss both the RF and NERC 2024 Summer Reliability Assessment. So with that, Tim, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yep.
Fantastic. So good afternoon, everyone. With the summer season approaching, we thought this would be the best time to share our analysis that NERC and ReliabilityFirst has put together for the upcoming season. The NERC assessment is created in conjunction with the Reliability Assessment Subcommittee, which I'm one of the members for. So all of the data is gathered through the NERC Reliability Assessment Team and is used in both the NERC report and the ReliabilityFirst report going forward. Next slide, please. So here's our agenda for today. I'm going to start off with the NERC Summer Reliability Assessment. One of the key drivers that we see is the weather. It is a major factor with regards to load and the potential for risks. So we're going to kind of talk about the anticipated summer coming forward. We're going to then dive into the risk summary and the resource adequacy analysis for the NERC. And then what ReliabilityFirst does is takes the similar numbers, but we kind of do our own analysis. And I'll talk about the comparison between the ReliabilityFirst and NERC's assessment. We'll also dive into our resource adequacy analysis. And then finally, our generator outage risk analysis, which is fairly new this year. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go forward. Next slide, please. So I've spoken so much about this, and I've spoken a couple of times at this Tech Talk, and someone brought it to my attention, and it was a fantastic idea. You hear these terms, the 50-50 and the 90-10, and for some people, they might not fully understand what we're talking about here. So I figured I'll just kind of throw in a very generic bell curve just to kind of level set everyone, make sure they understand some of the nomenclature that I'll be using throughout this presentation. And this bell curve is just for illustrative purposes only. So the 50-50 in this bell curve, as you say, is just the mean, the mode of the bell curve. And it just means that there's a 50% chance of the actual low will be higher and a 50% chance of the low will be lower. So what you see here is the assessment areas, the PJM, the RTOs, the MISOs do thousands of computer iterations. They're able to forecast the load based on several factors. What the weather's going to be like based a little bit on the forecast. And then they use the load for 20, 30, 40 years of historical load that they've seen over the years for each specific day. And then any type of load growth that they might see going forecast. And these computer models spit out just thousands of forecasted loads going forward. Then the model puts it into a bell curve going forward. And the one in the middle is the 50-50. We often also speak of the 90-10. So 50-50 will be under normal conditions. The 90-10 is in extreme conditions. And as the slide kind of shows, it's just a more robust, more severe type of analysis that we show here. And it just tries to put bookends that might occur for the upcoming summer season. A normal summer going forward, and then a more extreme, the 90-10 forecast. And it's just a 90% chance of it not happening and a 10% chance that it does actually happen. So again, just trying to level set everyone. We speak of these terms so often, I almost become accustomed to it, but I kind of open my eyes a little bit to kind of maybe I just illustratively show what these different numbers mean and what they mean going forward with this presentation. Next slide, please. So quick, we're going to dive into the NERC 2024 Summer Reliability Assessment. NERC did do a presentation. Hopefully some of you had a chance to listen to it in late May when they put out the report. This is just a summary of that as well in case you weren't able to make it into the NERC webinar that they hosted in late May. This is just a high-level overview, but I feel some of the themes do carry over, NERC-wide and then more directly into the ReliabilityFirst footprint going forward. Next slide, please. So I love this slide because it serves two purposes. It kind of tells me personally what the summer outlook is going to be like for temperature and precipitation, so you can plan your future summers, for the summer. Or more impactful is, my how the industry, the electric industry, is going to be affected by the temperature and the precipitation going forward. And we all know load is directly affected with the temperature. So high temperatures are the key driver. As you can see, again, if you look at through the ReliabilityFirst hourglass or glasses, you're seeing that most of the PJM and MISO are predicting above normal temperatures going forward. And then off to the right, the precipitation, and that could affect a quick storm rolling through, maybe a cloudy day that could affect load. These two independent factors do affect a lot of the load that we could potentially see coming forward in the next couple of months. Next slide, please.
Hey, Tim, we're losing your audio. Do you want to go ahead and turn off your video?
Michelle kind of showed this slide. I'm still there a little bit, but still, it's just as important. If that would absolutely, I apologize. Were you both of it, or should I kind of go back a slide or two?
We heard everything through the last slide, and then when we switched to this slide, summer risk assessment, is when we lost you for a second. So maybe start over with this slide.
No problem. Again, I apologize. As Michelle mentioned and kind of showed at the beginning of this, this is the NERC's high-level overview, quick summary of what the risk assessment looks forward to. PJM is expected as a low risk, which means that they can satisfy their load, their 50/50 and their 90/10, without any potential risks of operating conditions that they might have to dip into. MISO, on the other hand, which is a little bit of the orange through the central part of the United States, although in a good spot for their 50/50 expected load and forecasted generation outages, they are okay. But when we get into that 90/10, there is some potential of risks that could occur for MISO. This is similar to what we saw in the last year's summer assessment, the 2023 SRA. And MISO's new solar and natural gas generation and additional demand response, which is that load that could be curtailed, but those customers do pay at a lower rate, are offset by the generation retirements. So they're making some additions in natural gas and solar. Solar's coming on quite significantly, but there are also generator retirements that are coming. New firm imports and increased reserve requirements. And that I'll speak about a little bit in the next couple of slides going forward. But MISO is okay for their 50/50, the normal. There is some risk there at the 90/10 level going forward. Next slide, please. So NERC-wide, this slide is a fantastic overview of what's going on with the NERC-wide. It's just the raising demand and challenging resources and transmission adequacy. And when I refer to transmission adequacy, it's just the constrained resources in a particular assessment area. Maybe they have plenty of overall generation, but is constrained necessarily due to transmission limitations going forward. So there are some issues going in the raising demand in several areas. A continuing risk reliability concern that both NERC and ReliabilityFirst is trying to address is just the inverter-based tripping that's going on. These occurrences have 10 events that occurred outside the RF footprint, and that includes the blue cut fire going forward. As our industry matures and gains better knowledge with this inverter-based resources and understand how we can deal with them with their all of a sudden coming on or all of a sudden going out based on a cloud cover or wind drought, we're learning better, but we're still always trying to educate the industry on how to better understand the IBRs. Supply chain issues have always recently reared their ugly head with regards to just being able to get transformers, circuit breakers, transmission cables, and insulators, and the timeline that has been baked into some of these projects have increased significantly since 2020. So supply chain issues are just an ongoing, continuing concern. Maybe some latency issues regarding the coming back from COVID, but it's always an issue trying to get the proper equipment that you need for a project going forward. And there's a couple of good high points coming from this upcoming summer. Natural gas is at high levels, record high levels, but we always have to continue the vigilance. The vigilance is needed to ensure the reliability of our full fuel delivery to those natural gas generators, because we all know natural gas is almost, something that has to be planned and then delivered. So it's a very challenging process, but I think we're learning and maturing as we're getting our way through there. And then these demand side management programs, which are those programs that customers typically pay less of a rate for that load megawatt, but it could be curtailed if system operators need those megawatts to regain stability going on throughout the system. So there's actually in several areas the demand side management programs have actually increased going forward. And I can give you a little tidbit, but MISOs saw some significant increases in their demand side management programs going forward. Next slide, please. So here are all the assessment areas going forward. All of them are above the reserve margin requirement or targets. I know there's a lot of terminology that we're used in here. After the slides are posted, that link should become active. And if you're struggling with the different terminology that is used on this slide or throughout the report, that definition or that PDF will kind of help you through all the different definitions going forward. But I highlighted the two in green, which is MISOs, and then PJMs is also in the middle. The anticipated is just based on existing certain generation. Generation is iron in the ground, ready to serve load for the summer. And where you have perspective is those tier ones, which could be coming on, a little bit later on in the summer, or there's a small chance of them not being able to be available for the summer. So that's why there's a little bit different of prospective reserve margins going forward. And the black lines are the reserve margin requirement, or their reserve margin requirement going forward. Next slide, please. So now we're going to kind of dive into the PJM assessment, the NERC's PJM assessment. They're considered low risk again. PJM is expected no resource problems for the entire 2024 season. They are having some rising demand, those load pockets that we've often heard of in the Dominion area, some generation retirements, the generation retirement of coal, and slower than anticipated resource addition contributions, just kind of affect the reserve margin compared to the last summer. So just some of the retirements for the coal fire and the slower than anticipated resources, probably because of supply chain issues, have kind of showed the reserve margins kind of dipping down a little bit compared to 2023, which is on the right side of the slide here. We compare the 2023 versus the 2024. The waterfall charts here, if you work your way from left to right, we have the dark blue line, which is the anticipated resources for the peak hour. Over here, we have the typical forced outages that NERC polls and asks the assessment areas, the PJM and the MISOs of the area, of what are your typical forced outages for generator forced outages that you occur. And then you have one in the middle is the hash mark, and that is a deduction going forward there, but because it's hashed, it is considered the extreme, that 90-10. That's where that kind of affects the resources going forward. And then the green is the just additions that might happen that operating reserves, things of that nature that operators could use that you have to kind of categorize. The assessment areas choose the deductions in that center part of that chart. So each assessment area might have different, I'll call them deductions or additions to their resources and their loads going forward. So that's why the PJM and the MISO one are slightly different, is because they both identify different risks for the summer assessment, and they categorized it in that bucket going forward. So PJM, low risk because they are good for their 50-50 and their extreme forecast, their 90-10. They can meet their load going forward. Next slide. So now we're going to dive into the MISO assessment. Exact same setup as the PJM Again, those middle categories are different because the assessment area feels that those are more prevalent in their area. So that's why they had to choose, because MISO does have an extreme amount of wind, almost 31 gigawatts of wind potentially there. So they felt that the wind is a potential high risk for them, and they want to be able to categorize that in the waterfall chart. The hash marks are more extreme. So what you're seeing here is just a little bit of overlap with the hash marks going forward, and that's why they're considered elevated risk, because they can't meet there's the potential of not meeting your load for the elevated risk going forward. And the reason why their reserve margin requirement, that black solid line on the right part of the slide, has increased is because there was a methodology change for the planning resource auction that MISO requested the GEO's seasonally corrected generation verification test capabilities, or the GVTCs, updated on a seasonal base, because 2 years ago, or last year was MISO's first year doing a seasonal reserve margin requirement. It has helped MISO be able to identify better risks going into the summer seasons, but there were some changes that occurred going forward, and it just the different changes kind of increase the reserve margin requirement going forward. So, and that's why the reserve margin level increased from 15.9 in 2023 to 17.7 in 2024. So next slide, please. Just kind of reiterating, what has been kind of spoken about, good for their normal summer conditions. MISO can face some challenges going forward on the above normal peak conditions, and that could be increased demand or increased, increased generation outages, maybe due to potential of high temperatures and a high forced outage rate that might go on. MISO uses their max gen alerts, and all those do is just provide an early alert system conditions that may require the use of MISO's generation emergency procedures, and max gen alerts allow MISO's operators to dip into certain megawatts that are unavailable because of they're only allowed to use them when certain conditions are met, and MISO has to call on max gen alerts going forward. Next slide, please. So now we're going to kind of dive into the 2024 ReliabilityFirst summer assessment. Next slide, please. So here is the difference between the two different assessments. We use the same demand and the resources and demand response programs going forward. We use, what is different is that we use the GADS data, the Generator Availability Data System. The regions have able to get that type of analysis, that type of data from the entities that reported into the NERC OATI system. We use a 5-year period from May, so a rolling 5-year period from May through September, where NERC just asks the assessment areas what their typical generation forced outages going forward. They use June through September on weekdays, and they only use that 3-year rolling average going forward. So slightly a little bit different, but it'll show up in the results a little bit as well. Next slide, please. So high level overview, typical table, PJM's capacity and resources. The PJM has a 27.6 reserve margin. MISO has a 26.1. So we deem that as if PJM and MISO both are above the reserve margins requirements, ReliabilityFirst is projected to have sufficient resources for the 2024 summer period. So these are based on the 50-50 load conditions, which is typically the peak hour of the peak day going forward. Next slide, please. So typically I would show you the waterfall chart that ReliabilityFirst did. And during the off season, the engineering and system performance team kind of looked at that waterfall chart, and you had probabilities on the generator outages, and then you had probabilities that kind of stretched across the chart. And there were so many different types of things going forward. It became difficult to understand. So what we did is we kind of took another shot at it and looked at it very simplistically and kind of came up with this chart. So again, this is what this is just the likelihood of outages that occurred over those last 5 years during those summer months. And basically what I could walk you through is, 5,000 megawatts of generator outages, which is that first line going vertical, is they always had 5,000 megawatts of generator outages going forward during those summer periods. That's very typical. And as you work your way across the bottom, you have 15,000. We saw that roughly 63% of the time. And then we saw that 35,000, which is typical, generator outages that occurred over those 5 years. It was very slow, less than the 1%, or less than 10%. I'm sorry, kind of right around that 1%. So very simplistic. These are just focused on the generator outages and the likelihood that they occurred over those last 5 years during those summer months. So just trying to make this simplistic and easy for everyone to understand going forward. So next slide, please. So here is where we laid out the load. So what we did is we took that 90-10 and the 50-50 load, and we were able to take the subtraction of the generator outages and the top of that 90-10 chart, that 90-10 load, and we were able to get a delta there. And what that delta is how many generator outages, or how many megawatts in generator outages that have to occur before system operators in PJM would have to use mitigating conditions. And so what we're showing here is in the 90-10, and that 90-10 high load forecast, there needs to be about 26,200 megawatts of additional generator outages that need to occur before system operators need to implement operating mitigation programs that they have in their toolbox per se. And the 50-50, there's even more generator outages that need to occur, and that's approximately 31,900 megawatts of additional generator outages that need to occur before system operators need to kind of use the tools in their toolbox per se to try to develop, to try to mitigate any system risks that could occur going forward. So again, we tried to make it simplistic, easy to understand. We understood that the waterfall chart could be tricky to read. The old waterfall chart's tricky to read going forward. Next slide, Michelle, please. So same, same analysis that we use for PJM, we use for MISO. I can understand that the charts do look different, but there is slight differences, particularly between the 10 and 25 megawatt of generator outages that occurred. There are different likelihoods that those occurred, and that's the difference between just PJM and MISO. That's just the way of the beast. But there are slight differences that did occur, and there are, based on the similar analysis that we did for PJM and MISO. Next slide, please. And as you can see, if you remember what the PJM slide looks like, and as we become more familiar with this chart, I won't break this up into bits and pieces a little bit, but if you remember what the PJM chart looked like, it was the two yellow dots were way further down the chart, which means there needed to be a higher amount of generator outages that needed to occur before that 90-10 and 50-50 load kind of reached each other or intersected each other going forward. So MISO's is a little bit more in the middle. You're starting to see the 90-10, which is right around, the 90-10 is right around the 15,500 megawatts. I'm sorry, the 90-10 is the 15,500 megawatts, and then the 90 and the 50-50 is the 19,100 megawatts. So because there's less outages that need to occur before operators need to dip into that toolbox, they are becoming a more elevated risk going forward. So because PJM was further down the chart going off to the right, MISO is more centralized, lower amount of outages that needed to occur, elevated into into an elevated risk going forward. Next slide, please. Here, last slide. I'm here to just kind of sum it all up. Speaking for so long, hopefully you guys just remember this slide, which is the most important thing. PJM is projected to have adequate resources to satisfy their forecasted reserve margins for the 50/50 and their 90/10. MISO again, is projected to have adequate reserves for their 50/50, their normal operating conditions, but that 90/10 is always a risk because MISO has extreme amount of wind on the system. They have almost 31 gigawatts of wind. Typical, based on historical amounts, roughly 5,000 megawatts, 5,600 megawatts of generation is shows up every day on their peak day. So there's a huge discrepancy there. And that wind plays a huge factor into what system operators in MISO need to do to mitigate any potential risks going forward. So I think, yeah, that's my last slide. Next slide would be my name. If you have any questions, we can either address them here or you can send me an email. There's my email address on the slide. So.
Thank you, Tim. That was a great summary of both summer reliability assessments, both NERC's and RF's regional assessment. We do have a few questions that have come in through Slido. I'll go ahead and ask you. The first one is, how does the 2024 summer risk assessment compare to some of the NERC or RF longer term assessments? And do we see risks in future summers possibly?
Yes, so NERC also publishes the long-term reliability assessment, the LTRA, formerly it's also known as, that looks out 10 years going forward. That looks out 10 years of load, 10 years of those demand response programs, 10 years of resources and the different tiers that you see. So we do look out. There are potential risks coming up. I know specifically in Ontario, they're doing a huge nuclear refurbishment. There's some issues that identified where they have to bring in additional imports and exports. Solar is coming on quite significantly in both local, the ReliabilityFirst footprint, PJM and MISO. That is always a risk with regards to trying to balance the system on a day in and day out scenario because of cloud cover and things. So solar is always a risk. And we also have those load pockets in the Dominion in PJM's area, and some MISO's areas are seeing large amounts of load centers. AI is becoming large loads. Hydrogen production is also becoming a rather significant amount of load pockets in certain areas. So we do look out at the 10-year. We are identifying risks, and that report is in its infancy right now. We're just about to get our load collection, but the risk assessment, it all builds with, NERC and regions. We all look at all of these different risks in all of our footprints. We all get together and we publish a report that helps identify current risks and risks into the future, just to bring awareness to all of these pitfalls that could occur for system operators.
Great, thank you, Tim. The next question, is there consideration between the reactive resources that are not available for long-term planning studies / real-time operational assessments? And the question goes on, there are shunt capacitor banks that are not available in real time, but are being part of the studies in the planning horizon.
Okay, so that is always difficult to model with regards to reactive power, short circuit analysis, inertia. We at the NERC and ReliabilityFirst in the regions do not focus operationally on those. We leave those up to the PJMs and MISOs because they are so system dependent, hourly dependent. We focus on, just the resources, the load going forward for the summer and for the long-term reliability assessment. We stay away from the operational point of view where you would get into short circuit, system inertia, a type of analysis, because those are so system dependent going forward that it would be difficult to project a season or even years into the future. So no, we don't.
Okay, thanks, Tim. The next question, do the summer assessments by region account for possible imports from adjacent regions? And if the MISO is at an elevated risk, is this reduced if they could import from PJM?
Yes. There are so many dependent factors, but yes, the summer reliability assessment, the numbers that I've showed you here do account for firm transactions. They do have to be considered firm to be accounted for in these analysis that we do, the NERC and the ReliabilityFirst. But yes, there are non-firm transactions that do occur on a daily basis that we can't account for. And we do kind of caveat ours in saying that, yes, there could be additional imports into a MISO, a PJM, or vice versa, that could mitigate a risk hour, a risks day that we just can't account for, because that is so daily dependent that system operators probably don't even know what they have the next day for those non-firm transactions. So we can't account for those, but we do allow that to be possibly used, and we do say it in the report, but we mainly focus on firm transactions going forward.
Okay, thank you. The next question, what are the planning reserve margins and how do you calculate how much power you need? If you could go over
So the planning reserve margin requirements is based on a 1 day in 10, an LOLE, loss of load expectation. It's usually focused or modeled around the peak hour. So they take the peak load that could occur on that hour. They take the amount of generator outages typically that they would see. They do an LOLE, a probabilistic assessment that determines what is the minimum amount of generation and what is the minimum amount of percentage that you need above your load to be able to have adequate reserves for that peak hour, that peak day. So yes, there is several factors. There's transactions that occur, imports, exports. There are generator outages, typical for generator outages, and in most cases, they're broken out by fuel type. There's a detailed analysis that occur both at these assessment areas to develop this reserve margin requirement to try to predict and make sure they covered everything that they could for the upcoming season going forward.
Great explanation. And now moving on to our last question. When reviewing the generator outages, does that include a lack of wind where the wind turbine itself is available, but the actual wind as the fuel source is not available?
So this analysis has been going on for a couple of years. Our analysis does focus on the conventional generation. We are in the process of updating our analysis to include solar and wind. But for currently, we are just focused on those conventional resources, the natural gas, coal, nuclear, hydro. NERC is progressing and moving over to the OATI system for solar and wind. That will coincide with us updating our analysis on solar and wind. But yet we have not got that type of data yet, because we're currently, this year is the first year they're requiring it, and that won't happen until later in the year when all the data is due. So we're in the process of working on updating it, and then in the next year or two, we're going to roll out the additional solar and wind going forward. But what you're referencing is, the generator available or the wind turbine available, but there's no wind blowing. I would account that kind of like a reserve margin, or maybe not. No, that would be there is not enough fuel. So we are working on updating our process going forward, and we'll work on an analysis to account for those nomenclatures or those little anomalies that happen going forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim. That was a great overview of the assessments. Really appreciate you going through that with us here today.